This evening, I have the privilege of being the moderator for tonight's program, focusing on the Armenian community and hate crimes against the Armenian community. This evening, we have the privilege of hearing from attorneys Lucy Varpetian, Alex Bastian, and Armin Huvanisian. All of these esteemed members of the legal community are part of the Armenian Bar Association. Lucy Varpetian is a principal assistant city attorney in the Glendale City Attorney's Office. She provides transactional advice to the city's fire department, Department of Information Services, city clerk, and the human resources and finance departments. Ms. Varpetian has extensive experience in all aspects of city government, including legal support to the Civil Service Commission, the Commission on the Status of Women, and the Interagency Communications Interoperability Systems, Joint Powers Authority, ICI System JPA. She also oversees the city's legal externship program. Prior to joining the city attorney's office, Ms. Varpetian practiced law at Meserve, Mumper, and Hughes LLP. Among her various community leadership positions, Ms. Varpetian is the chairperson of the Armenian Bar Association, an organization with several hundred members worldwide, and also one of our co-sponsors for the event this evening. She also serves on the boards of the Glendale YMCA and on the Los Angeles County Bar Association's Judicial Election Evaluation Committee. Ms. Varpetian is a graduate of the Southwestern University School of Law, and before that, the University of Southern California. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, Ms. Varpetian. Alex Bastian serves as a special advisor to Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon. Bastian is responsible for providing guidance and direction in the development of internal and external messages and media strategies. He also represents and supports Gascon in handling many other routine and complex responsibilities as delegated by the district attorney. Bastian comes to the DA's office having previously worked for nearly 11 years at the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. He was first hired as a prosecutor by then District Attorney Kamala Harris. He began his career as an assistant district attorney in the criminal division and ultimately worked as the deputy chief of staff for then District Attorney Gascon and current District Attorney Chesa Boudin. While in San Francisco, Bastian worked with media and legislative partners to generate the momentum needed to pass the Smartphone Theft Protection Act that has led to sizable reductions in smartphone thefts and laid the blueprint for similar efforts worldwide. Bastian has tackled important regulatory and compliance issues by working to bring the first consumer action by a government office against Uber, but has also spearheaded efforts to cooperate with the company on other public safety endeavors. He also has worked on many policy initiatives, including the country's first office-level policy to proactively review, reclassify, or dismiss all marijuana-related convictions for impacted individuals under the landmark voter initiative, Prop 64. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of California, Los Angeles, and a Juris Doctorate degree from the University of San Francisco School of Law. He was the first Armenian American prosecutor in San Francisco, speaks 5 languages, and has been published on topics such as racial profiling, gentrification, human rights, history, revision, and genocide. Thank you so much for being with us, Alex. Armin Huvanisian is a 3-time chairman of the Armenian Bar Association, the presiding chairman of its Armenian Genocide Reparations Committee, and a member of its Board of Governors. Admitted to practice before the United States Supreme Court, to which the Armenian Bar has petitioned as amicus curiae with respect to genocide-related recovery efforts, Mr. Huvanisian is one of the chief litigators in the Major Claims Legal Office of Chubb, appearing regularly in state and federal courts. Before his 20-year tenure at Chubb, Mr. Huvanisian held the post of Vice President, Environmental Claims for Markel West, directing its legal department and focusing on the resolution of complex environmental and product liability exposures. From 1987 to 1998, he worked at the Los Angeles office of the New York-based law firm of Chadbourne and Park, LLP, first learning and then honing the craft of advocacy in knotty legal disputes. At Chadbourne, Mr. Huvanesian received the firm-wide Pro Bono Award for his representation of indigent clients, many of whom were newly arrived Armenian immigrants experiencing serious personal challenges. Graduating from UC Berkeley summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa honors, Mr. Huvanesian received his Juris Doctor degree from UCLA School of Law. He has presented at legal and community oriented conferences and has served on the California State Bar Standing Committee on Ethnic Minority Relations. Mr. Huvanesian's professional and academic works have appeared in various publications, including the Environmental Claims Journal and the Armenian Review. We have an esteemed panel before us this evening, and I want to personally thank them for their interest and willingness to speak to us this evening. And I want to thank CLA, the Armenian Bar Association, and to all of you for coming and joining us on this rich journey that we're going to embark on. And with that, we will begin with a question for Mr. Huvanesian. Can you please provide us with an overview of Armenian settlements in the United States and the discrimination faced by the Armenian community?
Sure, thank you. Let me first preliminarily say, Adrianette and the California Lawyers Association, thank you very much for inviting representatives of the Armenian Bar Association on this bridge of common understanding. And it's truly our hope that by the end of tonight and into the days and weeks to come, we can continue to build the planks on which all of us should be walking together. You asked a question about the settlements, the early settlements in the United States or in California of the Armenians. I think it's often helpful to, before we talk about where we are now, we sort of highlight where we came from and who we are. As Adrianette said, my name is Armen. I was born in the heart of the San Joaquin Valley in California's breadbasket capital of Fresno, California. I was raised in Los Angeles, California, attended public schools. But I'll have to start it off this way and abruptly, that every one of my grandparents, as I am now talking in the year 2021, every one of my grandparents, several of whom lived well into the 21st century, and all of the grandparents of virtually all of my Armenian friends and acquaintances were born in a land called Armenia. That land called Armenia is not some illusory, whimsical, allegorical, fictional place. It was a real place that was brought home to us because those grandparents that were able to survive trial and tribulation, which we'll talk about a bit today, came to live in our homes, and we, when we were youngsters, our language and learned our faith and learned our religion in their homes. And so every one of my Armenian friends and acquaintances had the touch, the tactile immediacy of a grandparent that came from a land called Armenia. And but for that multi-generational, multi-centurial, over many centuries, oppression that the Armenians suffered in their homeland, at least for 600 years since the Ottoman Turks came, my family would not be in Sherman Oaks, California. Alex would not be in San Francisco and not Los Angeles, and Lucy would not be in Los Angeles either. We would be in those hamlets and villages and towns and cities in historic Armenia. It is a very unnatural occurrence that we're here. The very unnatural occurrence, despite the fact that we are very appreciative of our, as we call them, the host countries, and my family's been here for more than 100 years, was that long handle and that heavy sledgehammer of Turkish Ottoman oppression against the Armenian people since the 15th century to the early 20th century. And before the Turks, the Ottoman Turks came on the scene, the Armenians, let's remember, folks, were the indigenous people of that land. And just so that you get it, when I went to Palisades High School, not too far away. I was one of just, 2 or 3 Armenians, both teachers, not so much the teachers, but my classmates. would say, are you from Romania? Are you from Bulgaria? Are you Iranian? It was just a mosh pit there for us. And so for you and everybody doesn't know, even though Armenia was at the tip of the tongues and in the center of the hearts of most Americans in the early 1900s, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But most people don't know where Armenia is. So just figure Greece, all the places that you'd like to go for vacation. Go a little bit east of that, go back a little bit east of that, and then picture Russia up here, go a little south of that. And then there's the Middle East here, go a little bit north of that. There's the Mediterranean, the Black Sea. So we're right we're that chunk of meat, that succulent meat right in the middle. And we've been on that chunk of succulent land for thousands of years, going back to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 before Christ, with kingdoms and principalities and independence, and caught between the Romans on the west and the Persians and Russians on the east, caught between empires. But we've always been known as the cradle of civilization, because so many things started where we started, and it continues to be a very important geopolitical context for us. So the reason our grandparents came to the United States in the early 20th century is because the Armenians were a little bit different in their own homeland. They had a little different faith. We were Christian. Our neighbors were not Christian. We were treated like second-class citizens. We were not given the right to bear arms when our neighbors did. We were not able to testify in courts against non-Christians, and the non-Christians were able to testify against us. You do the math. How many times when you had an Armenian defendant was that person convicted, and how many times when you had a Turkish or Muslim defendant charged was he or she convicted when there was an Armenian witness to be had? So we know about that. Armenians weren't allowed to do the most basic things. They weren't able to ride horses in town. Their homes couldn't be set above the homes of the non-Armenians below them. We paid more taxes. When we were conscripted into their armies, we weren't able to hold arms. We were put into military work battalions. Over time, and let me just try to speed this up, we became a psychological problem for the paranoid leaders of that empire. And as many people know, but it has been forgotten, and that's why there's a struggle for reaffirmation of the Armenian Genocide. The Armenian Genocide got underway symbolically and in reality on April 24th, 1915, where our best and brightest educators, teachers, doctors, and lawyers were taken away and killed. And that then was the onset of the Armenian Genocide, which continued in the immediate months afterwards, and then going for a few years into the early 1920s. So that area that I tried to describe for you, somewhere east of Greece and south of Russia, it's about 1,000 miles long, and it's about 500 miles wide. You got the Black Sea and Mediterranean. It's not a small piece of land. And in that piece of land, in 1915, there were a little bit more than 2 million Armenians there. By the end of the Armenian Genocide, claimed the numbers they're important, but anywhere up to 1.5 million people. So just imagine that for a minute. 3 out of 4 of every one of your race, every one of your family are killed. And when the genocide got underway, it was premeditated. They separated the families real quickly. The men were killed right off. The women and children were put on the death marches to the Mesopotamian and Syrian deserts. And that's where America will come in, because America had a great, great hand in helping the Armenian orphans. And I can pick that up a little later, but I just want to end the introduction with this. When those barefoot and bedraggled, those who are mentioned in Emma Lazarus's epitaph at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty came to Ellis Island, or they went to Marseille, or they went to South America, They came with not much, but they came with a sturdy set of values and principles and ethics of recovery, of rehabilitation, of renaissance, of rebuilding our homes. And that's what the early communities did, not without a great deal of prejudice once they got here. But this is also what they came with. And this is why this hate culture that is now apparent around us and mushrooming and burgeoning is too native for us. Because when my grandmother and grandfather and Alex's great-grandmother, grandfather, and Lucy's and all of my friends and family's grandparents, when they came here, they came with this cellular development that we had for hundreds of years been squelched of our ability to live and breathe free. But what did we do in the face of that? We nevertheless built our schools, built our churches, our community centers, our patriotic organizations. We taught our children the song and dance of Armenia. My children downstairs know the song and dance of Armenia because Armenia, even though we're distanced from it by 7,000 or 8,000 miles, it lives in us. But the loss was catastrophic. The scope and scale is unfathomable. When we talk about indigenous rights of those in Australia, those in Canada, those in the United States, it's not so much that there should be a competition on humiliation and victimhood, but I dare say that in the history, in the annals of history, it hasn't happened when such an ancient and vibrant and peaceful and civilized civilization has been brought virtually to its knees. I say virtually because they did not succeed in the genocide, even though the last several months has seen the attempted continuation of it at the hands of the Turkish and Azeri forces in Artsakh and Armenia. We are here. And what time does, Adrianette and friends, time not only allows to heal, time allows us to repopulate, to repropagate. And we learn the language, we learn the ways. We go into business, we go into profession, we go into schools, we go into little leagues. And we now our voice is no longer clipped like the early Fresno Armenians when they were there and they were discriminated against with all the housing covenants. This is the time now, though, as I said, for us to build common causeways of understanding and cooperation with not only the majority communities, but especially with the minority and marginalized communities.
Thank you so much for that, laying the groundwork. I did not know that many people were killed in the genocide. That's mind-boggling and extremely unfortunate. Can you please speak to perhaps, or maybe you want to start with your own family's engagement with Fresno, Central California, because you touched on that a little bit. Can you talk about the Armenian settlements?
I'll try to encapsulate it. So those who survived were not the able-bodied men after 1915. They were the orphan little girls mostly, and sometimes the orphan little boys who were taken to various hostels and orphanages that were supported by Protestant missionaries, Catholic missionaries with great United States involvement. Let me tell you this. Many of us don't know about the engagement of the United States in helping Armenia, helping humanity. In 1915, that year of the genocide, the New York Times ran like 200 articles on the Armenian genocide. And there was a nationwide engagement and mobilization to help the Armenian orphans. And it was through this effort called the Near East Relief, which was supported by President Woodrow Wilson, to be President Warren Harding, to be President Herbert Hoover. And there was this mass ad campaign. I get this, I really came to think, I mean, boy, America and Americans are so good when they strip all politics away from the dialogue, that there was something in the 1920s called Golden Rule Sunday. So Golden Rule Sunday, you know, the Golden Rule, do unto others as you would like for them to do unto you. And so all throughout the United States, on any given, on designated Sunday, Americans, families would, instead of eating, and it was monetized, their $3 meal, Sunday dinner meal, eat that meal that the orphan would be eating that day in an Armenian orphanage. And that came out to 4 cents. It came out to 4 cents because the meal was corn grits and beans. And whatever the savings would be, then that would go to Near East Relief's campaign. Folks, do you know that in the early 1920s, the United States of America and its great citizens and bleeding hearts, bleeding in the most positive way, donated $115 million to save 132,000 Armenian orphans? That 115 million is more than $2 billion today. Do we know that like everybody in America was behind it on that Golden Rule Sunday? On one of those Sundays, 20,000 Chicago families, 20,000 in 1920 participated in this. President Woodrow Wilson sent 3 Navy ships. On those Navy ships, there were 15 100-bed hospital units. There were 100 trucks. There were 20 cars. There were 15 motorcycles, all to help the Armenian orphans. It was immense mobilization, both in the PR and in people's everyday lives. We don't have many of these oral histories anymore, but if you talk to your great-grandparents or grandparents who are not of Armenian descent and they're old Americans, they'll tell you about the starving Armenians and about how people in America really tried to help those starving Armenians. Now, having said that real quickly in just 1 or 2 minutes, Armenians, you know, came to America thinking that this is the land of, you know, fruit and honey and opportunity and prosperity. And in many ways, it was, and it continues to be. But because we came with that chip on our shoulder, which was inbred in us because we had been persecuted. After, by the way, after they killed our great-grandfathers and put our children in the orphanages, whatever women were there, the non-Christian killers, murderers took them. They took our girls. They took our mothers and created new motherhoods for them, forced, and brand new inaugural motherhoods for our little 9 and 10 and 11-year-old great-grandmothers, or my grandmother's sisters, let's say. It's violent. It's violent. And because, and I say this in a passionate way, because it flows through us. When we go to bed and wake up every night in the United States, I don't care how long we're here, we go to bed Armenian and we wake up Armenian. And we don't know quite well, maybe we're white, maybe we're not white. We know that we have been wronged. And we know that we are fighting for justice. And that wrong continued in the early settlements in Fresno, housing discrimination against Black Americans, against Asian Americans, and they put that Armenian right in there. It wasn't until a Supreme Court case in 1948, Shelley versus Kramer, that got rid of those racial covenants. But just like the Jim Crow laws prolonged the marginalization and discrimination, they still had discrimination against the Armenians there, because then the housing brokers would have that handshake deal. Oh, we're not gonna sell it to the Armenian. That's for sure. Now this discrimination didn't happen everywhere. It happened in those places that weren't too small, where the Armenians wouldn't be perceived as very energetic, industrious, maybe having their own foods, having their own language, having their own dance and culture, and not in places that are too big. Like it really didn't happen as much in Fresno or Boston as it did in Fresno. Fresno was just big, just small enough, and just not too small and not too big in order for there to be that backlash. And it's only now. There still is that underseated bias there, but it's only now in the 21st century that I think that one is really feeling that there isn't this strong undercurrent of discrimination. In fact, because Armenians were excluded from social organization, fraternal organizations, we started our own. Because they couldn't do their own athletics teams, we started our own. But at the same time, we tried to assimilate and acculturate. That second generation, my dad's generation, they didn't want to have much to do with the genocide. My dad's name is Richard. His brother's name is Vernon, and his brother's name is John, and his brother's name is Ralph. My grandparents wanted their sons, their boys, to have too bumpy of a time here in the United States. And they were able to acculturate and assimilate. But look what happens. It skips generations in many, many fundamental ways. So that vying for life and liberty and freedom and humanity and justice has been passed on, not only to me, and my brothers and my sister, but to our children. And I don't speak for myself. I am talking for, and I will say this immodestly, for virtually everybody in the Armenian Bar Association and virtually everybody who's involved in the Armenian community today. So I've taken quite a bit too much time. If I can ask Adrianette that we move on, and then if I can.
Sure. Well, you gave us a great, you gave us a wealth of knowledge. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the periodization of the genocide and, post-genocide and United States assistance, and also the struggles that the Armenian community faced. And we're going to turn to the modernization of hate crimes against the Armenian community. So we will turn to both Lucy and Alex, but I will ask Lucy a question first. And Alex, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but can you define hate crime for us whenever, if you can do it now, that'll be great. I realize I'm putting you on the spot though.
Most definitely. As someone who actually has prosecuted hate crimes before, I'm happy to do that. It's essentially any kind of crime where you have the specific intent to carry out that crime because of someone's race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability. And it really is a high bar, actually, because it does require someone to have that specific intent to carry it out for that purpose. And the other reason it's a high bar is because you need to have the evidence necessary in order to say that someone did that because of that person's protected class. And so oftentimes those two things, those two components, the law and the facts, are very important in order to determine whether something is a hate crime.
Great, thank you so much. And with that, Lucy, I will ask you the next question. What sort of lawsuits have been brought to date? And can you shed some light on what Armin touched on briefly in terms of what happened in the end of 2020 with respect to the Armenian community in Armenia?
So I think it's important to say when we talk about the context of the genocide, it's important to say that until this day, the fact that it occurred is that there's no admission on the part of present-day Turkey. Despite the evidence, despite the eyewitness testimony, despite the historical context, there's a denial that there was ever a genocide. It's minimized to say, well, there was a war, it was World War I, both sides
Lucy, can I interject? Who is denying the genocide?
The government, the present day government of Turkey. Okay. And what's important, and I think we should say this in the context of the various minority groups and our opportunity and ability to be involved and engaged in our own governmental systems, because of the political pressure that the United States receives. For many, many, many years, the Armenian community has been lobbying to have the genocide recognized as such, no differently than the Holocaust being recognized as a Holocaust. And that continued denial is, I think, what we can all agree continues to keep the wounds open. It continues to give our community a sense of pain, a sense of ongoing pain, and an inability to heal and move forward. And it's not really even an issue of financial reparations. Several years ago, we joined with the Japanese American Bar Association, and we took a trip to Manzanar. And we had a discussion there with a survivor of the Manzanar camp. And he shared with us that in the 80s, there was recognition on the part of the US government of the fact that they had been placed in concentration camps. And then there was this modest effort to give these families $10,000 in the form of reparations. And the gentleman that was there at the museum said that he didn't want it. He didn't want the $10,000. And so it made us think, because we have fought so hard to get recognition, to get reparations, and to hear his story about how that effort was so small in the context of what he and his family had suffered, that he preferred not to receive it. And so the fact that there has been no recognition on the part of many governments, mostly because succumbing to political pressure of Turkey's position, it becomes a very difficult emotional difficulty for the Armenian communities worldwide to overcome. Now, last year there was recognition on the part of both houses to say that what had happened to the Armenians 100 years ago was in fact a genocide. We're hopeful that it will be recognized as such by the current sitting president when it comes time for it in this April. And so that, I think, for our community in the United States will shift how we feel in what has happened to us and where we go from here. We also think that it will make a change with what is happening in Armenia and in the Republic of Artsakh presently. And that war was started, not to get into too much of the details, but about 30 years ago, while the Soviet Union still existed, the sovereign state of, or the region of Artsakh declared its independence as it was able to do under then current law. That then later on, the Soviet Union collapsed. There was a war that followed. There were pogroms in Baku and Sumgait. And for about 30 years, Azerbaijan, the Republic of Artsakh was able to enjoy independence and a rebuilding. All of that came to a screeching halt on September 27th, when the peaceful people of Artsakh were attacked with the assistance of the Republic of Turkey, using modern day weaponry, using mercenaries, using technology and intelligence that was developed in the West on this very small population of 150,000 people. Over 90,000 people were displaced. And I think this is something that Alex will be able to touch on. When we talk about something happening in Artsakh, and you think about it from the context of Los Angeles, California, I should be feeling very secure and comfortable living in the United States with regard to my liberties, my security, my safety. But what was happening in Artsakh and in Armenia traveled all the way across the waters and got to San Francisco, California. And it got to, 2 years before that, into the San Fernando Valley. And when that type of reach is so immediate into your own community, into your own security, And when you start thinking about the safety of your child and his ability to live comfortably, because we are certainly given those the notion that there's security in the United States, all of that can go away very, very quickly. And so I don't want to not answer your first question, but I do want to segue into what is happening in San Francisco, and maybe Alex can touch upon that. And as he starts speaking, I'm going to share my screen with some photos just to illustrate for you what I mean.
Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Alex. I thought maybe you'd talk about the...
Sure. I mean, well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having us here today. I really want to start off this conversation by talking about the trauma that Armenian people have experienced, which is very similar to the trauma that many marginalized and oppressed people have experienced. And you can tell that that trauma is there when Lucy talks, when Armin talks, and when I talk. And that trauma is something that gets triggered when things happen, attacks happen to our community. And it's something that gets triggered when we see other marginalized communities attacked as well. When we see Black people oppressed, it is triggering. When we see Native Americans essentially erased off the earth, it is triggering. When we see our Latinx sisters and brothers attacked and vilified, it's triggering. When we see our AAPI sisters and brothers victimized, it's triggering. And the reason it's triggering is because there's something that Armenian people know. We know what it is to be ignored. We know what it is to be forgotten. And we know what it's like when your wound doesn't heal, because our wound has never healed. And I love this country. I'm American. I love this country to death. But unfortunately, sometimes I feel like this country doesn't love me back. You know, and I can speak on that on so many different occasions. I mean, let's talk about hate crimes in San Francisco just last year. I wish I could tell you that the Armenian experience, the genocide, oh, this is something that existed in a foreign land. This is something that existed in the last century. I wish I can tell you that that's what this is, the Armenian experience is. But just last year in 2020 in San Francisco, one of the progressive bastions, no pun intended, of the world, right, experienced numerous hate crimes against my community. My small community in San Francisco experienced 4 hate crimes. And they weren't just the run-of-the-mill, not to say any hate crime is run-of-the-mill, because any crime against one of us, when it's a hate crime, is truly a crime against all of us. But these crimes were directed at my church, where I was baptized, and my elementary school, where I went to. My school was shot up. My church was burned down. And the reason these are so significant is because our church and our school, where our children play and our children go, where we teach them tolerance and love, this is where we're supposed to feel comfortable, to be in our skin, to be in our identity, to be in our culture. And as much as we love being American, that DNA, that survivor DNA, that survivor genetics is alive and well in us. Now, what happens with Armenian people oftentimes is this, well, they're not exterminating us. Well, it's okay. They just burned down our church. We'll rebuild. Oh, it's okay. They just shot up our school. You know, they took shots at that. Thankfully, no kids got killed, right? That's what Armenian people do. It's that survivor mentality, right? And that's very common, by the way, in very marginalized communities where, because of the way that we've been able to cope with trauma, we normalize this. We make it feel like it's totally okay, but it's not okay. It's actually not okay. It's not okay to be attacked based on your ethnicity, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your disability. And you know what else is not okay? Racial profiling, which is another thing that unfortunately far too often Armenians experience, especially at the airport. I myself was coming back from Armenia. I was detained in the back room. It's not a secret. It's in the New York Times. And when I thought about back and forth whether or not I should do this, write something about it, I noticed that my father has been experiencing that. In fact, he experienced something 3 days later. My brother experienced that. And after I wrote that particular article, I got a flood of calls from various young Armenian and semi-young Armenian men indicating to me that they've experienced the same. And so, unfortunately, we live in a country that I love to death, but we can do better. We can do a whole lot better. George Floyd, we could do a whole lot better. It's disturbing. It's disturbing that we can't love one another like sisters and brothers. And that's why for us in our community, it's not just about building bridges with other marginalized communities. We are sisters and brothers in the same struggle. We've been that way since the beginning of time. And I'll say this, unfortunately, when something does happen to our community, a lot of people are silent. You know, thankfully, there were local media entities that covered a church burning down and a school getting shot up in the Bay Area, but that was it. Other than, and fortunately, I'm surrounded by so many amazing human beings of all walks of life, sisters and brothers, moms, dads, cousins, everybody that just was so supportive. But unfortunately, it felt lonely. And that's why these bridges are so important. That's why the Armenian Bar Association is looking to build bridges all the time. But it's more than just building bridges, because an attack on one of us is truly an attack on all of us. And it's truly, at the end of the day, about pushing up humanity.
Wow, thank you so much. That was really prolific and profound at the same time. And I remember your posts on social media this summer, and I remember seeing everything on the news and just being baffled, just that it's 2020, we're in a pandemic, and people don't have better things to do than to ruin a church and a school and to threaten the safety of kids and a community. And it's not okay. So with that said,
can I just do
go ahead.
a commentary to this? Segueing from where I started about the loss of our homeland, that homeland that we'd had for thousands of years, that 1,000 mile by 500 mile. And that's where we grew up. That's where we had babies. That's where we got married. That's where we, buried our dead. That's our place. William Saroyan wrote in one of his many books that a place really doesn't belong to you until you've buried one of your own there. Well, the Armenians buried millions of their own. I'm not talking about the genocide, but over thousands of years in that land. That land is our land. And it remains our land, and it just lies to the west of current day Armenia. Armenia right now is maybe 1/10 of what our homeland should be. The reason why we're supersized traumatized now is because since the Turkish Azerbaijani aggression against Armenians in Artsakh, which happened at the end of September, just this last year. And I don't fault anybody for not knowing everything about it, but that was a continuation of those genocidal policies, maybe not on the same scale, maybe not on the same scope, but with that same anger, that same hostility, that same animus and animosity that the Armenian is the other. And who are the perpetrators? I'm sorry, it's just not happenstance. And sometime as we get more mature and we get a little bit more bold, we can call out the perpetrator. The current Republic of Turkey is the successor regime of the Ottoman Empire, which perpetrated the Armenian Genocide. That current Republic of Turkey and its president, Erdogan, gave men and material that would blow your minds in order to stack the deck against the hugely outnumbered Armenians in Armenia. Armenia is a country of only 2.5–3 million people at most. Their aggressors from the east was Azerbaijan with 10 million, and then Turkey with 80 million, they say. So basically almost 100 million non-Armenians, non-co-religionists, your enemies for hundreds of years. And starting on September, what they did is they already emptied us from the lands where I talked about, where my grandparents were born and Lucy's and many others. Now they went to that little strip of land just on the east side of Armenia called Artsakh. Artsakh is just this, a few hundred miles this way, a few hundred miles that way, but always like historic Armenia, indigenous Armenian civilizations proven by anthropologists, sociologists for thousands and thousands of years. And then they went ahead and they trumped up a reason for being aggressors against us. And they used all 21st century technologies to kill and maim our 18 to 20-year-old boys, volunteers in the Armenian army, who tried to their last breaths to save that part of the historic homeland. That part of the historic homeland hadn't been lost 100 years ago. But the Turkish-Azeri alliance doubled down and they say, now we want this. And now they took it, Adrianette. They took 75% or 80% of that second piece of sacred land. And now we've been put in the Republic of Armenia with all of those shattered lives and shattered psyches that extend beyond oceans here to California and beyond, to try to reclaim ourselves. More importantly, to try to help them reclaim themselves. You have thousands.
Has there been any effort for the assistance by the UN or the United States or anything? Because it seems like a modern day genocide again. It seems like it's recurring. What have other countries or the United Nations, for example, done to assist the community in Armenia?
Well, I know what the Bar Association has done, but I'll pass the baton now to the Bar's chairwoman, Lucy Varpetian, to say what the United Nations and the world in general has done, or more likely what it hasn't done.
We received a crash course in the United Nations. I did certainly more recently through the persistence and diligence of one of our board members. We have been a lot more proactive in our participation in the various bodies of the UN. But one of the things that we recognized, and it's important, I think, that we understand that as lawyers, we really have to know that the pen has to be mightier than the sword. And we really have to utilize those tools that we have spent our lives perfecting. And for us, our ability to write really has to be put to the test. And so the things that we focused on through the Bar Association, we're trying to, number one, battle the paid propaganda of the perpetrators. And at one point we had learned that they had contracts with every PR firm in the East Coast. Well, certainly the government of Armenia cannot keep up with that. But what we saw at the beginning of the war were multiple articles that were sharing just one side of what was going on and really faulting Armenia, who had not done the attack. And then over time, as reporters started to travel to Armenia and to Azerbaijan and become eyewitnesses to what was going on, the narrative started to change, although the damage had already been done. So as lawyers, when we talk about what we could do, we could write. And we started to write. The next thing that we focused on was studying those letters that were being submitted by Azerbaijan, sometimes almost simultaneously with what, something that they would do. They would utilize chemical weapons and almost immediately issue a statement saying that Armenia was using chemical weapons on its own citizens. It was very difficult for us to keep up with that, but we were committed to creating an accurate record. And so we started preparing reports that included photographs, that included eyewitness testimony, that included credible reports that were coming out of both Armenia and Artsakh. So we started systematically to draft letters and reports that we filed with the various bodies with the UN. The more immediate task that we have been involved with is in the coming days and weeks, We will be getting in touch with actual victims of the war and preparing. There are mechanisms within the UN to submit and file these types of individual victim complaints. And I'm thinking about this one particular woman. Her, I'll just share her first name is Armenuhi. Armenuhi is, we met her at one of the help centers in Armenia. And she was sitting there with her 4 children. Her oldest one was on the front lines. His young bride was pregnant, sitting there with them. And they had come from the Hadrut region. And in the early morning hours when the war broke on September 27th, her son was sent to the front lines. The family was trying to decide, what do we do? Do we go back home? Do we go to Armenia? Do we stay in Hadrut? Ultimately, the wife, Armenuhi, with her 4 children and her daughter-in-law, her pregnant daughter-in-law, goes to Armenia. Her husband decides to stay behind and to protect the home, in essence, to look after the home. He said that, she explained that they were remodeling the home that the son and the young bride were going to live in. And in order to protect that investment, he had decided to stay behind. Later on, she received word that when that town of Hadrut was overtaken, the husband had been tortured and he had been hung in their own home. And so these are very real stories. And these types of stories where people have suffered actual harm are things that lawyers can and should be involved in. And so this is a very important project of the Armenian Bar Association. We're proud to have taken it on with quite a few of our young lawyer members. I'm certain I'm forgetting certain things, but our focus has always been trying to maintain accurate records so that at some point when there is an opportunity to see our day in court, to see justice done, that it will not be dismissed because, for example, we did not maintain a proper chain of custody on a video demonstrating the beheading of a soldier, for example. So these are the types of things that we have been involved in, and I can get more specific as we go. But
Lucy, can I ask a question about this? I mean, since the war started, during a pandemic, right, like a global pandemic, and also since social media is so prevalent and everyone has a smartphone, cameras are everywhere, how has social media, or what role has social media played in the telling the story of what has actually happened in Armenia? Like, how has social media played into like providing the accurate record, as you mentioned, and preserving the record, rather?
So I want to show you another slide here, because when we talk about social media, let me see, can I resume slideshow? I want to show you this because the war went from being on the ground to being in social media. And there's a huge responsibility that I think those who have these platforms have to accept. So for example, you get this type of a message, and look at the responses. I don't think 1.5 million was enough with flags of Turkey and Azerbaijan. You deserve a second genocide, which will inevitably happen. I mean, these are threats that are coming to, and then here, like the most shocking part of it, this person who's posting this is a woman, Roya Amirova. She's saying your mom, sister, daughter, and wife on their knees in 19, I'm not going to say it on the webinar, but you should get more. Why didn't we kill you all? I'm so disappointed. So this type of messaging went on social media over many, many months. And when we talk about the war moving from Artsakh and Armenia to the United States and to the different parts of the globe, young lawyers, women who would post messages about their own family members either being fallen or becoming victims in some way. The response from American citizens, these are not, the Azeri bots or the, these are US citizens who could just as easily be your neighbors, that were taking this war and personalizing it in such a horrible way, where I go back to how secure do you feel in the United States? It really does sort of challenge your notion of safety. But in addition, I would say the opposite, what was happening on the ground, what we would see were captives, individuals who'd been captured. There was one picture of an old man who could barely walk. I couldn't watch the whole video, but the humiliation that they brought onto this man, and captured it all on video, and then the soldiers themselves posted as if it was a sense of pride that they were able to do this. This wasn't an onlooker who was videotaping this. This was a sense of pride and accomplishment to videotape yourself committing a crime, which is a war crime, to, after you've captured someone, to torture them, behead them, cut off their ears and body parts. To be wearing that with such great pride, to be posting it on social media is really quite astonishing. And then at some point, TikTok, for example, the messaging and the videos that were on TikTok became so psychologically difficult for Armenians in Armenia to watch, that it wasn't because they didn't want the information to come to Armenians, but the overall psyche was so impacted that temporarily TikTok services were suspended in Armenia so that psychological torture would not be ongoing. So the social media aspect.
Let me just interject. While you were talking about the images of these soldiers glorifying the atrocities committed against the older man, it immediately brings me to the memory of seeing the police in Colorado after they killed Elijah McClain, and they were posing, excuse me, I'm getting emotional, but they were posing like that was okay, right? Excuse me. And it's not. And we have to do something as attorneys really to stop it. It's not okay.
It isn't. And I think,
so many Armenians, well, there was such an immediate impact on us because that man who died at the hands of not even a sharp knife, was all of our uncles and grandfathers. We put ourselves right there on the scene. We were totally incapacitated. You can imagine the amount of rage. Adrianette, when you talk about social media, it's there. And so those are being cataloged. The day will come when the cases are made. But I will tell you, with all the social media, it's not helping, because you talked about the United Nations. The United Nations and all of its constituent bodies, they live in a house of diplomacy. You're not in a court of law. There are equivalencies, there's equivocation, there's bogus equalities. Can't you all get along, Armenians and Azeris? Come on, come to your senses. Meanwhile, Armenian boys, 200 POWs are still in Azerbaijan. Armenia holds no Azeri POWs. Meanwhile, the dozens of churches and sacred Christian monasteries that were taken from us a couple months ago, some of them, their before and after pictures just last week. There was the church yesterday. Today it's gone. It's gone. No more altar, no more steeple, nothing like that. And then there's the Azeri soldier on the top. He kicks down the cross and he starts blurting out the prayer. his faith's prayer. By the way, we're not just inert witnesses to this. We put these in petitions to the United Nations and other committees. And we work, I have to tell you, the greatest job is being done under the radar by Armenia's permanent mission in New York. That's Ambassador Magarian, the legal advisor Sofia, the human rights ombudsperson of the Republic of Armenia, Arman Tatoyan, heroism incarnate, and the ombuds, human rights defender of Artsakh. These are the documentarians for us. These are the people really talking truth, not talking truth, putting their necks on the line, their lives on the line, and their credibility and their careers on the line. Not without pushback. I mean, you should see how they're ridiculed in the enemy states. But the point is this: social media, for all of its potential advantages, hasn't helped stop the bleeding, hasn't helped an Armenian who used to go to church in September at his church to go to that church, first of all, because that church is no longer there, or because it's been converted into a barn, or because the president of Azerbaijan said, you're just not coming back. You can't come back to your home.
Adrian,
So it's this culture of hate. That's why we identify so much to what has been happening in the United States. My friends and I sort of joke. We joke because we're the daddies. We're the daddies of this victimhood, not a mantle we want to claim proudly. It courses through our blood. It goes from generation to generation. And we can go to the LADA's office, and we can go to the white shoe law firms. We can go to city governments. We can be the best lawyers and professors in the world. But we're carrying that pack on our back because they haven't given us the ability to lighten it. They deny their crime. This is not a perpetrator-less crime. It's a perpetrator-full crime and continuing crimes. And the perpetrators not only are standing there, they're doing an Irish jig on us, or whatever jig, a dervish on us. And so far, they got the United States and a handful of other Western civilized countries not willing to have the, cojones to say, you know what, truth is truth. Aren't we tired? Isn't the world, especially in 2021, tired of the bullies? Aren't we tired of the China bully, of the Russia bully, of the Middle East bully? Some people are tired of the US bully, but anyway, that's an aside.
So, Adriana, you had an emotional reaction to a recollection of a video that you saw just now. I could tell you that living through the entire 44 days and even now of the war, morning, noon, and night with these images, I had such a connection to what my grandmother would have seen when she was a little girl, when my grandmother was about 12 years old during the genocide. And so what she would have seen, what she would have felt, she was on a death march from Smyrna all the way to the coast. And then she was put on a boat and transferred to Greece. And Greece, as the host country, took her. But it is those images that I saw today, present day, that brought back for me the stories of my grandmother and made me feel what she would have felt and made it very, very real to the point where I was feeling it on my skin, just like you were a moment ago, thinking about, a video that you had seen. And so these things are very difficult. They're not foreign to us. It's not something that happened 100 years ago. It's difficult to detach ourselves. It's difficult to not continue to be traumatized by it. But there are two questions in the Q&A, and Armin, if you could see it, I think that first one probably belongs to you.
I don't see it.
I can read it.
Yeah.
It says, it's from Sarah Dudley. Sarah says, as I understand it, the Turkish government laid claim to the family property land of the women and children who they forcibly converted to Islam enforced into Turkish families, the other motherhoods that were spoken of? Are the Turkish descendants of these women and children aware of their Armenian heritage? Is there an effort to restore this land and property to Armenia/Armenians?
That's a very, very prescient and telling question. Yes, I mean, when I say yes, my sister, by the way, is Ani Hovanesian. She's a documentarian. And right now, as I'm speaking, she's speaking on the month of April is the commemorative month for the Armenian Genocide. She has a documentary that's going to be published called The Hidden Map. And that hidden map talks about the hidden Armenians, the children, the grandchildren, great-grandchildren of those young Armenian girls, of those abducted Armenian mothers, who then had Armenian children, at least half or a quarter and whatnot. Most of them, just because of time and erosion, they were lost in assimilation. But now it's a really unique phenomenon that it's coming out of the woodwork. They're the Hemshen Armenians in northern Turkey who speak Armenian, but they're Muslims, but they're Armenian by blood. There are others that are coming out that are saying, oh, I have the story now. That book, my great-grandmother's book that we found under her mattress, really tells the story when her name was Hegnar in 1914. And then they changed it to Fatma in 1917. And then you have this curious person reading the memoirs of his great-grandmother, and that gets the ball moving. And so there is this nascent curiosity that is more than just episodic among what we would think are Turks or Kurds in Turkey. Let me ask Harag a question. It's almost the low-lying fruit, Alex, is that, what are the commonalities among marginalized communities? Why should we be talking to, and there are many good reasons, with Adrianette, with the California Lawyers Association, to, as you said, are all of our minority brothers or sisters. Can you tell me why the majority population should listen to your story? What it is what's their interest? Are they going to make anything out of this? Does it connect to their lives? Does it have any?
I have a few things to say, actually. I've been waiting patiently so that I can get in on this, because I think that's a very poignant question. I think first and foremost, what impacts any one of us really impacts all of us as a society, as a community, as a country, and as a planet. And I think that there was a question earlier about what we can do as lawyers, and I think it wasn't really answered. There are a lot of things we can do here in America, because unfortunately, the country that I love so much, this country, can do so much better. It has blood on its hands. The decisions it makes, unfortunately, have negative consequences, not just domestically, which it 100% does, but the decisions it makes in terms of foreign policy have disastrous consequences on this earth. And unfortunately, that includes Armenian people on steroids, right? There have been many decisions made by this country that have horrible ramifications for people that look like me, share my culture, and share my identity halfway around the globe. And I can get into some of that, because first and foremost, I would love to say that America as a country is free from intervention and foreign interference. But unfortunately, there was a foreign nation, a foreign government that did manage to influence the last administration, the Trump administration. And interestingly enough, by the court documents, it wasn't Russia, it was actually the Republic of Turkey. And they were able to influence Michael Flynn. They were able to stomp out Turkish bodyguards for Mr. Erdogan, were able to stomp out Armenian and Kurdish American protesters in Washington, D.C. They were able to do that with impunity. That happened in 2016, I believe, and there was no real consequence for that. And I wish I could say that it ended there, but it doesn't, because whether it be the Armenian communities, the survivor communities, my grandfather, by the way, was also born right before the genocide, survived the genocide, and he ended up in Lebanon. But many of the things that we see in Syria, in Iraq, and Lebanon are very near and dear to us as Armenian Americans too, because we have sizable communities there. And interestingly enough, some of the horrible videos that we've seen from entities such as ISIS have really been directed against Armenian communities in these regions. And unfortunately, yet again, ISIS and the Republic of Turkey have very close allegiances and ties. The reason I say the Republic of Turkey is because I think there's a huge distinction there. I love my Turkish sisters and brothers, my Azerbaijani sisters and brothers. I love everyone. I think most Armenians that you would talk to, even though they experience a ton of trauma and sometimes they speak from a place of frustration and anger, I think we love everyone. I think we try to teach each and every one of us, our children, our grandchildren, our sisters and brothers, to love everyone. But unfortunately, this government, the Republic of Turkey, led by Mr. Erdogan, which I don't need to tell you about him, feel free to Google it yourself and see the kind of person we're talking about. Unfortunately, this person has different ideas. And unfortunately, this government has different ideas as far as the culture that I am a member of. And I hate to say this, but sometimes it feels like we're just running away from the eraser, trying not to be erased as a people. The legacy aspect of things is so vital, right? We talk about the genocide almost being exterminated. Fast forward to all the various foreign policy issues happening here in America, which all of us as lawyers can really kind of partake in. We can really take a moral stand by researching and seeing why our country is so inclined to support a country such as the Republic of Turkey, why we're so inclined to allow for military weapons to go to this country, where those military weapons are used to kill people that look like me and share my culture. These are questions we should be asking ourselves and our elected representatives. But I think the legacy aspect is so important. It's actually one of the reasons why I'm in the work that I do. Justice is such an important concept to me. That's why I work at the LA District Attorney's Office. And when we talk about legacy, I mean, look, I believe a vast majority of people in policing and law enforcement are very amazing human beings that are trying to do the right thing. But, you know, the roots, a couple of them in policing, actually go all the way back to slavery. The legacy of the criminal legal system is really designed to, initially, some of the roots, I don't want to make it sound like the entire criminal legal system, but some of the roots, the legacy is in the oppression and enslavement of Black people, right? Or in the over-incarceration of Latinx folks, whether it be the war on marijuana, whether it be various other war on drug efforts, the crack epidemic, right? So the legacy aspect of things is so important. So we can do two things. The first thing we can do as it relates to the Armenian cause is we can start really pushing forward, not just a domestic policy that loves one another and really focuses in when any of our sisters and brothers are attacked, but we can also look at this on the global level, in the foreign policy level. Why is this country we love so much, that is supposed to be the beacon of hope, the beacon of democracy, the beacon of human rights, why is it supporting the oppression and enslavement of people across the globe? And in specific, in this day and age, on this particular day, my people, right? And when I say my people, I'm American. Again, I can't stress that enough, but people that share my culture and share my heritage. So that's number one. The second thing we can do as lawyers is we can all be active in something to make a change locally, because in order to make a change globally, you can act locally. So if any of you are interested in doing something remarkable, advancing public safety, increasing equity, expanding services for our victims, and strengthening police accountability, you have an opportunity at the LA District Attorney's Office. You have an opportunity at the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. You have an opportunity to enter either a governmental job in the State Department. You have an opportunity to do some pro bono work, to focus in on something you care about. And all of us together as lawyers, I 100% believe can make a huge difference, and we can all change the world for the better.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that thoughtful response, Alex. Here's a question from Lois Fishman that I think you might be a good person to at least start the answer to. Lois says, why do you think the recent conflict in Arkash had negative resonance in the US against Armenian Americans? Do you want to answer that one, Alex?
Say that again?
Do you want to answer that one?
I didn't hear the question. It was, why do I think the recent conflict in Artsakh had negative resonance in the United States against Armenian Americans?
Yes.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with PR, and a lot of that has to do with this new day and age that we're living in with social media. Unfortunately, we live in a country, which I love to death, where social media is abundant and it's being used as a tool. I think we've all seen that. And what's happened is also something that really kind of narrowly tailors around lobbying and public relations firms that are able to really focus in on our government to push them in a particular direction. The other thing is geopolitical interests. This country has a lot of oil interests across the globe, which we all know about, and it has a lot of geopolitical interests in the region. And the thing about the countries that we're talking about in the region, they have, unfortunately, regimes that essentially do not allow for free discord of information within these countries, right? So if you're talking about a place like Turkey, for example, I believe Erdogan just a few years ago rounded up about 50,000 public servants and put them in jail because of disagreements over their political affiliations. If you talk about Azerbaijan in their recent war, there was essentially a total freeze on all social media. And what that ends up doing, unfortunately, is that ends up stifling communication. So there's a stifling of communication there. And in the United States, unfortunately, with social media, lobbying, and PR firms, there is an overabundance of information here. And that kind of overabundance essentially floods you and makes you think that, okay, well, the Armenians are saying there was a genocide committed against them. Yeah, all these historians agree and this whole thing happened. But Turkey is saying, well, a lot of people died, so be it. That's what the normal historical lens of, Turkish historians says. And there are these lobbyists and there are these PR specialists who are also pushing that narrative. And why should I care as an American? Because at the end of the day, it's something, all these people look alike, let them deal with it. And unfortunately, that's the reality during a pandemic on steroids, right? Everyone's dealing with a pandemic. And the reality is there's a reason why this happened during a pandemic, because the world was asleep, right? So I think that a lot of it has to do with that, it has to do with geopolitical interests. But I think the truth shall set us free. I think that at the end of the day, love will set us free. I think that righteousness will set us free. And so with that, I think that's kind of why it resonated the way that it did.
But I think it speaks to the people who are on this call, right? Why are you here? I mean, clearly the title was about something that you didn't know anything about, and yet you decided to sign up and spend your hour and a half on this webinar. Or individuals who have signed up for the series that the committee has been putting on since January on different communities. I think it's incumbent on each of us to take a few extra minutes when we read something, because it's so easy to keep swiping. It's, just read the headline and then keep swiping. And then you think that you're aware of what's happening in the world, but you really aren't. You really have to take that extra step and click. And then, maybe because you know someone or you've heard something, I have over 1,100 Facebook friends. And in 44 days of war, I posted message upon message about what was happening. And the only people who would click the reaction buttons were other Armenians. And it was so hard to understand why no one else in the community would even ask what's going on. you don't have to, go beyond that. But I would think that we know each other. There should have been some level of care. And when the Italian American Bar Association decided to invite us to make a few remarks at one of their meetings, it was so important to us. And that happened because of one person. It happened because of their chairperson, who wasn't Armenian, but was concerned and curious and interested and wanted others to know as well. After some time, I had written an op-ed that was published in the Daily Journal. I went in the office to gather some things months after it had been published. And there was a note on a little Post-it from one of my coworkers who thanked me for writing that article. She felt like, and she wasn't Armenian, she isn't Armenian, she felt like the article that she read gave her a little extra information and insight into what her colleagues and what her friends who work at the city of Glendale, who have an Armenian background, what we all would have been going through. And that note was so touching, was so important for me to receive from her, because it really felt like I wasn't alone. It wasn't just me talking with other Armenians about what I was experiencing and the difficulty that I was going through. And so those little things that we do for one another, it's not going to change the world. It's not going to make the war stop, but it is going to bring us closer together and allow us to have a better understanding of the world.
And what it really is, it's about storytelling in so many ways. It's been said that, one life lost is a tragedy and 1 million lives lost is just a statistic. And so what really catches the public's imagination and interest is that single person's story, which in all likelihood is emblematic of a grander theme. So what we have to learn how to do better is to tell those stories. That's how I think that we can get people to, as you say, Alex, to love us just as we love them. It's through the story of my mother, let's say, a doctor who worked for 50 years in Los Angeles and now is struggling mightily with memory loss. But one of the few things that she hasn't forgotten is where she comes from, who put her in this place, and her memory of the nightmares that her father used to have as he remembered the Armenian Genocide. So it's by telling that story about that person that can get people to connect with us.
I was just going to say one more thing on that. This experience is not unique to Armenians. For example, for years, we've been seeing various postings about people being killed at the hands of police. And for the longest period of time, there seemed to be a kind of ennui, a cavalier nature by the vast majority of Americans about it. And it wasn't until recently, really the last few years, and especially after George Floyd was murdered, that we really started seeing everyone in our community so focused on this, really needing a change here. And so it's so important that we just keep at it. And it's not just as it relates to social media, right? I know for years, for example, the Anti-Defamation League was working to end Holocaust denial. And after years of such a painstaking effort, they did a phenomenal job at being able to really end something that's so atrocious, denying the Holocaust, And this is not something that's unique to social media. This is not something that's unique to our people, but it is something that all of us can work together to make better.
Thank you so much. We have three remaining, 2 questions and 1 statement. So I'm just going to read them quickly because it's already almost 7 o'clock. I can't believe the time has just evaporated. So Talar Toprakjian, and I'm sorry if I butchered your name, says, this isn't a question, but I don't think many have love for Turks and Azerbaijanis, as Mr. Bastian claims. All of my grandparents are orphan survivors of the genocide who witnessed their family get killed and marched to a foreign land, and people with denial and attacks ongoing. It is almost disrespectful to say I love the descendants of genocide committers who are not fixing the damage. So that is a comment. And I'm going to go to the questions. Tanya Festegian, I'm so sorry. Apologize because I know I didn't say that right. Why can't we sue social media companies and allow hate speech, which encourages hate crimes, as is being done by an NGO in France, I believe? This hate speech would not be allowed in printed media. It is known that this hate speech has encouraged ethnic cleansing as well. I'm assuming in Myanmar. Does anyone have an answer or have a comment to that?
Well, we have Mr. Slickchan, we've been working with various social media companies, interfacing with their general counsel, including with Facebook and others, and Snapchat, to do exactly that. Unfortunately, the bar is very, very high in order to sue a media company. You almost have to prove almost criminal intent, not quite, but it's very high. And so we have taken the tack so far of having very productive conversations where there has been a change of policy incrementally with respect to showing those very hostile pronouncements of anti-Armenianism. But it's sort of like the UN, like I was saying, that here they are, they're trying to balance. Instead of just calling a spade, they're just saying, okay, the Armenians said this and the Azeris said that, so both of you, can you just clean up your act a little bit? Well, you know what, that false equivalency really is a disservice to the truth and to justice. There was a perpetrator here. There were people, there were children and women who were killed. I'm not talking about the genocide. I'm talking about civilian deaths in the last 6 months in Armenia and in Artsakh that are unaccounted for, unspoken for. The bodies of our dead 18 to 20-year-olds still come incrementally back from the war zone 5 months after the war ended. And as I said, they're still holding in captivity hundreds of our young boys who probably, you can just imagine the grieving families, the families that may have already lost a boy, with their families that have lost, brothers and cousins. So the point being that it's a tough road to hoe when you talk to the media companies and when you talk to the United Nations. They want to sort of be King Solomon. They're not going to take a very strident and very righteous position because they're not in the business. Their business model is completely different from that. But there are ways to influence. I'm happy to report, happy to say that there has been incremental moving of the needle in a positive direction.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. There was one more. Do you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, and the next comment, I think we responded to whether or not President Biden will recognize the genocide. We're certainly hopeful that he does. But I think it is a process. It is a process with the social media companies. And it is, again, we go back to our responsibility. It took a long time, and they took a very bold step. And at one point, both Facebook and Twitter blocked the account of a sitting president. I mean, it took a long time for them to get there, but there is a line that these companies believe you cannot cross. And so for many of them, it comes down to education, policies, procedures, and guess who writes those? Regular lawyers, right? They're regular lawyers write these policies, and people who don't know that a certain word that's used in a different language is particularly disturbing or has another meaning that Google Translate isn't going to give you. So it comes back to a process that we as lawyers have to continue to engage in. We have to be involved in those processes, which we have and we like to continue to do. It's an education of ourselves and it's an education of them. And so I would welcome anyone who is on this webinar to contact the Armenian Bar Association at info@armenianbar.org. There are many, many, many ways that you can get involved. Alex talked about, the DA's offices and other governmental offices, but certainly being involved in bar associations. Reach out to Adrianette. I'm sure she can use the help on this newly formed committee. I'm sure she will appreciate getting help from you if you're volunteering to give her the perspective of the Armenian community on a regular basis, on an ongoing basis. You can't be at home watching social media or watching TV and then talking to other Armenians exclusively about what we are experiencing. We really have to engage and be involved with everyone else in the community.
And I don't know who asked the question about, is President Biden going to recognize the Armenian Genocide? But for those of our CLA viewers and listeners who are not Armenian, let me assure you that if President Biden does not, that does not mean the genocide didn't happen. In fact, it redoubles the truth of the Armenian genocide, because the facts, there's such a mandate on the facts and the evidence of the Armenian genocide that you really are not going to feel proud to be an American, because that will be the triumph of geostrategic, geopolitical interests over truth and justice. But where they've underestimated the Armenians are, as much as we have that DNA that you started with, Adrianette, the DNA of the victim, and so it's nothing new to us. The stronger chromosome in us is the DNA to survive and to outlive adversity. And the testimonials of that are the life stories of all Armenian families. So eventually it's going to happen. Time, when they say time's not on our side, they thought time wasn't on our side when the last of the genocide survivors passed away a year or two ago. Maybe there's maybe a handful left in the world, but it's highly doubtful. But maybe two or three. But point is that the time, I don't think time is going to work against us. We have now crossed the Rubicon of eternal vigilance. And when I say eternal, Adrianette, it is not romantic. This is not some type of pie in the sky that, oh, we're here forever. The Armenians are here forever until truth and justice are delivered to it. And if it's not delivered to it, then we will do all means, all ways necessary, legal, to get it for us.
Thank you so much. We are over time, and I can't believe that the time literally has evaporated. This has been amazing. I appreciate each and every one of you for your time, for your energy, for your passion, and for wanting to do this. And we planned it specifically to be in April because we knew it was Armenian Heritage Month. And so thank you all for coming. And to all of our attendees, we can't see you, but thank you so much. And we look forward to working with the Armenian Bar Association again. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.